Hello, my name is Nicole Carson Bonilla and I'm a portrait photographer. I was so impressed with Disney's live-action remake of Cinderella. Costume designer Sandy Powell created some gorgeous and iconic outfits. And for me, they were definite eye candy throughout the movie. Not to be outdone by the gorgeous blue ball gown was Cinderella's work dress. It was simple yet beautiful and paralleled Ella's transformation to Cinderella. We watched the dress become more and more faded as the movie went on. In this video, I'm going to show you step by step how I made my version of Cinderella's work dress for an epic photo shoot project that I've been dreaming of making since the movie came out. Then I'll show you some behind the scenes and final portraits from our epic photo shoots that included hanging laundry amongst roaming geese, feeding dinner scraps to actual mice, waking up next to the cinders, meeting a prince on horseback, and finally fitting into a perfectly sized glass slipper. But before we go any further, please do me a quick favor and click the like and subscribe buttons below. My favorite place to shop for fabric is actually a local thrift store called Goodwill. I found a set of bed sheets in the perfect shade of teal or aqua for the dress. They are pre-shrunk, super soft, and the perfect texture. For the petticoat, I purchased this thin cotton and a spool of matching ribbon from Hobby Lobby. For boning, I purchased on Amazon this half-inch plastic boning you can easily sew through. I already had this extra fabric from a cream-colored bedsheet I purchased from Goodwill that I used for the neckline. To hand paint the floral pattern on the dress, I used this fabric ink purchased from Hobby Lobby. For the apron, I used this brown bed sheet that I also had purchased from Goodwill. I first made the bodice out of some scrap fabric so I could test it out. It didn't fit quite as snug as I was wanting, so I made a few adjustments. Then I laid simple gift-wrapped tissue paper over the pattern pieces to make new pattern pieces with my adjustments. I prepped the fitted sheet by removing the elastic and cutting through the corners to maximize the usable fabric. Then I cut out the bodice and sleeve pattern pieces. I sewed the bodice front and back pieces to each other and together at the shoulder seams. I came up with a simple method of creating the gathered panel on the front of the dress. I started by measuring the width of the front panel piece and then quadrupled the width for the gathered piece. I made the gathered layer the same height as the base layer. Then I lightly marked 3 dashed lines with a pencil about every 2 inches for the horizontal gathered stitches. Then I made 2 parallel gathering stitches on each line. Then I gradually started pulling in the gathering threads until the gathered piece was the same width as the base layer. To help flatten out the gathers, I sprayed the gathered piece with some water. Then I placed a plastic bin on top of it while it dried. Once dry, I pinned the gathered piece to the base layer and stay stitched them together. Then I top stitched across the gathering threads to help flatten and hold them in place. To make the thin ruffle that goes around the neckline, I cut off the wide band at the top of the flat sheet and then cut it down the middle. I used a rolled hem foot on my sewing machine to create a narrow, neat hem. Then I used my gathering foot to quickly gather the other edge. I'm a huge fan of time-saving presser feet, when they work properly. I sandwiched the ruffle between the right sides of the lining and outer layer of the dress. I pinned around the neckline and sewed it into place. I cut small notches in the seam before turning it right side out. This ensures a nice flat neckline. Then I cut my half-inch boning to the length of the 2 sides of the front gathered panel. I sewed it into place right next to the gathered panel. The boning will help the gathered panel hold its shape and be flattering on the model. I serged and sewed the side seams of the bodice together. I cut out the sleeves, which consisted of 2 pattern pieces for each sleeve. I sewed them together and made a small rolled hem across the bottoms. Then I sewed the sleeves into the garment. Before starting on the skirt of the dress, I folded the bodice in half to make sure the bottom edge of the bodice was symmetrical. I decided to raise the side seams up another ½ inch and neatly trimmed both halves. For the skirt, I wanted to utilize every square inch of the flat sheet I had. I measured what I wanted the length of the skirt to be and then cut the sheet across the width in 2 strips. Then I needed to angle the top of the front piece to account for the lower point in the bottom of the bodice. So I measured down about 2 inches from one end to the other and cut. I sewed the skirt front and back pieces together at the sides. Before sewing in the gathering stitches along the top of the skirt, I wanted to make sure my bobbin was full of thread so I could have long, continuous gathering threads. Then I stitched the gathering threads across the top of the skirt. I pulled the gathering threads and adjusted the skirt to the width of the bottom of the bodice. I sewed them together and serged the selvage for a clean finish. Then I serged the lining and outer layer of the bodice along the back opening in preparation for the zipper. I sewed the zipper to both sides of the back of the dress. I top stitched on the outside about a 1/4 inch from the zipper for reinforcement. This dress will be a snug fit on my model, so I wanted to make sure my zipper was secure. For the cream lining, I cut a strip of fabric from a cream bedsheet I already had. Then I serged one edge and folded it over to make a small casing. I serged the outer edge of the strip to finish it off. I pulled a strand of serger thread to make a drawstring to go inside the small casing. Then I gathered the opposite side of the ruffle to adjust it to the length of the neckline. Then I top stitched on the outer edge of the dress to hold the cream lining in place. And I still ended up using a couple little safety pins here and there to adjust it. To paint on the flowers, I started by printing out a template I found online thanks to Bella Mays. I printed the flowers full scale and tiled them on letter-size paper. I placed the papers on my cutting board and then covered them with a plastic shower curtain. I experimented with several different paint types to get the dyed look of the flowers. This fabric ink I purchased at Hobby Lobby worked great. I poured about a teaspoon of paint into a bowl of water. Then I very loosely painted large circular shapes over the flower petals. I found the more abstract I painted, the better it looked. I did the same with the green fabric ink for the small leaves. I made very loose strokes around the outsides of the flowers. To speed up the drying process, I used a hairdryer and dried each section as I painted. I painted 6 vertical rows of flowers around the skirt. I preferred to do this process after making the dress versus before. I wanted to see the finished skirt distribution before committing to painting the flowers. To fill in the rest of the skirt with small flowers, I made smaller abstract flower shapes in a diamond pattern. I placed a plastic bag over my dress form and underneath the dress. Then I proceeded to paint small flowers in the diamond pattern directly onto the dress. The flower shapes looked more like small V's. Again, I was glad I chose to do this step after the dress was made so I could aesthetically place the flowers in the right spots. The ink dried very quickly and I was able to make any needed touch-ups. For the petticoat, I measured the length so it would be about the same length as the dress. Then I cut 2 pieces that were 3 yards long for the front and back. I didn't want to add any bulk around the waist of the dress, so I made a 4-inch yoke that would drop the gathered seam 4 inches below the model's waist. I cut a strip of fabric that was about 9 inches by 38 inches for the yoke. I hemmed both ends before folding it in half. I sewed a gathering stitch into the top of the skirt pieces. I folded the yoke in force and placed pin in the fold lines. Then I folded the skirt piece in force and placed pins in its fold lines. Then I matched up the pins and pinned the yoke and skirt together. I pulled the gathering threads until the skirt matched the yoke. I pinned them in place and stitched them together. I serged the raw edge before top stitching the seam. Then I stitched the back pieces together, leaving about a 10-inch opening. I hemmed the bottom with a simple 1/2-inch hem. To make the casing for the ribbon, I stitched a 1/2-inch seam in the upper edge of the yoke. I cut a ribbon about 50 inches long and snaked it through the casing seam using a safety pin. Cinderella's apron in the movie was a medium brown color. I already had a dark brown bed sheet, so I went with it to make the apron. I measured the dress to get the ideal size for the apron. I cut it out and hemmed around the sides and bottom of the large front panel. Then I cut out a rectangle for the yoke and long rectangles for the straps. I sewed the straps in half and stitched along the long edge and one end. Then I turned them right side out. I folded the yoke in half and pinned the 2 straps to the inside edge. Then I sewed up the sides. I used my gathering foot to gather the upper edge of the apron. I pinned it to one side of the yoke and stitched it into place. Then I turned the yoke right side out, pressed, and top stitched along the seam to finish it off. I had way more fun making this dress than I was expecting, and I experimented with some new techniques that I think paid off. Now, I'm a huge fan of historical accuracy, but I also believe you have to work with what you got. My version of the dress isn't exactly like the movie version in like the front panel, but it has a similar vibe and it looked great in our photo shoots. Here are some behind-the-scenes footage and final portraits of my photo shoots with Kelsie and Brady as Cinderella and Kit. We had so much fun and I hope you enjoy this. If you like this video, please take a second and click the like and subscribe buttons below. Then I can keep making behind the scenes videos like this one as I recreate some of our most iconic dresses.